Again, I'm Jack Barron, Managing Director here at Venture for ClimateTech, or as we abbreviate it, V4C. So V4C is a small introduction to that. We're a not-for-profit. We're a nonprofit accelerator, which is really a mentorship program is maybe the best way to describe it, and a connector. I like to describe it that way as well. That helps secure a more sustainable future for innovators, entrepreneurs, co-founders, and we help them get to the next stage and really commercialize their business. We connect them with technical experts and mentors across the field, as well as investors, and help prepare them for investment. It's a 6-month virtual program. Each year now we bring in 20 pre-seed and seed companies, some as early stage as just from a paper, some much further along, all the way up to about technology readiness level 7. And we provide up to $50,000 in non-dilutive funding. Plus, of course, as I mentioned, we do introduce them, the co-founders, typically, once they're ready, to investors in the network for dilutive funding. Applications are now open for cohort 4. My team always wants to remind me of that. We've got a couple hundred applications already in process. Last year, we had roughly 300, and it's a very competitive program, but we typically take about 40 into the boot camp. So we'll get you into the network one way or another if we can. Today's panelists are alumni, all alumni of the program. They're over the last year, they've become friends of ours because that's the way this program works. And I like to think of the co-founders and the companies that we bring through the program as, this sounds kind of odd, but kind of like our children. They never leave us, and we never leave them. So this is going to be a great chance for you all to hear about their journey and how they're proceeding. With us today, we have Rory Brogan, founder and CEO of Torev Motors. Thanks for joining us, Rory. Jeff Prosserman, founder and CEO of VoltPost. A lot of you may have heard about VoltPost. Brian Tolliver, founder and CEO of Banyon Power. Our facilitator today is Laura Fox. Laura is co-founder and managing partner at Street Life Ventures, a seed stage venture fund investing in urban climate solutions to transform sectors, including mobility, buildings, energy, waste, and water. Laura has had deep roots in mobility. She previously led City Bike and Lyft and built them into a $100 million recurring revenue business. Diligenced mobility solutions at Sidewalk Labs and launched new mobility companies while at BCG with their digital ventures group. Quite a resume and CV, Laura. Laura, thank you for joining us. Thank you for taking the time. I'll turn it over to you. I forgot to mention, Laura's on the Board of Governors from Board of Governors Island in New York City, which I was just having a chat with about this past few days. And she's a fellow with MIT's Mobility Initiative. Sorry, Laura. There you go.
No, all good. No, I'm excited to be here to moderate this panel. Love what Venture for ClimateTech does. Met a lot of folks here through that program too, and consistently recommend it to founders who are in that early stage of R&D and thinking about kind of how to build their product, what that looks like, because I think the support that the program provides is pretty incredible. So happy to be here. And thought that we could just start first with a couple questions in terms of introductions, both of the panelists and then also to their relationship to V4C, and then get into some of the content. I think as Jack was mentioning earlier, there's a Q&A function, so we'll try to be responsive in terms of questions that come in and make sure that things that are kind of hot and top of mind for folks get answered too. So to start with that round of introductions first, just want to start with the panelists, and Brian, alphabetically, I'll start with you and then we'll move around. Could you introduce yourself and share a little bit more of the story of like your company, like what the journey has been in terms of building it, in terms of like idea at the beginning and where you are today?
Great, thank you, Laura, and thank you, everyone, and hello to everyone out there in Zoom land. So look, my name is Brian Tolliver, and I'm the founder and CEO of Banyon Power. And to Laura's question, we provide enabling technologies that accelerate the transition to EVs by making it more accessible and with respect to charging at home, but also assisting grid with onboarding 240 million cars in the US. And so that ranges from assisting utilities as well as energy providers with scaling that and managing the load. I think just briefly, Laura, to your question, I think for me, the journey started when I worked in industry. So I worked in the power industry and learned a lot about energy and renewables. And so I saw, pain points in my day job. And then separate from that, in my home life, we bought an EV about 7 years ago. And so I experienced firsthand a lot of the pain points. And so ultimately, that's what led me to found Banyon, and then obviously identified, V4C as a great setting to really work and help me kind of develop the business model and the company.
Awesome. Thanks, Brian. Jeff, you want to go next?
Sure.
Well,
Oh.
sorry, is there two Jeffs now?
It's you, Jeff.
Or Jack, did you call, or?
Jeff, you're up next, Jeff.
You're up, Jeff. I'm just here on the wall.
Sounds good. So Jeff Brogan, co-founder and CEO at VoltPost, where we're on a mission to decarbonize mobility by democratizing charging access. We participated in the first cohort of the Venture for ClimateTech Accelerator. It provided great early days support for the company. We've been going just over 3 years now. We're a seed stage venture-backed company with a team in New York, San Francisco, and a few people distributed, where we're retrofitting existing lampposts into an EV charging platform for both the public and private sector. And yeah, excited to be here today.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeff. Rory?
Awesome. Well, hey, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time to be on here with us today. I'm Rory Brogan. I'm the founder and CEO at Torev Motors. And we're the pioneers of what is referred to as a double axial flux motor, which is fancy engineering speak for a more efficient electric motor that takes advantage of a very unique architecture to significantly reduce the consumption of rare earth metals in electric motors. And so we really focus on providing EVs a sustainable first step in their electric motors, maintaining vehicle performance and insulating supply chains, keeping costs down, all that good stuff in the process. Company started officially about 2 years ago, although the idea itself is much older than that, all the way back to 2016 is when I first started working on this, electrical engineer, mathematician. Started out as a passion project that had no idea where it was going to go, and so fortunate to have made the progress we have. And of course, Venture for ClimateTech played a major role in that in terms of helping us along the way and getting us in front of the folks that we need to be in front of.
Awesome. And I want to dig a little bit more into the role of Venture for ClimateTech, because each of you joined fairly early on in your journeys as you were building products out. And, Jeff, I'm going to start with you because we met when you did Venture for ClimateTech, which is my first year as a mentor when I was running City Bike. What are a couple, 2 to 3 things that you would say that you took away from Venture for ClimateTech that were practically really helpful to how you all built out VoltPost?
Yeah, I would say that being part of this accelerator was really a first or early step of validation in that what we were building or exploring to build at that time, because we hadn't actually built the product, would be something that could make a measurable positive impact in New York and beyond. And I mean, the concept of VoltPost came out of a research paper that I wrote in the Columbia Master's program, and then we brought the idea to the managing director at that time, Jackie, really just step above that concept paper. And going through customer discovery, trying to define what the product requirements would be in order to get this off the ground, if it's something that is even worth pursuing from a time and energy perspective, let alone if it's something that could generate enough interest to gain private investment. And through that accelerator experience, obviously met Laura and many other tremendous advisors who weighed in on the business case and the opportunity and sharpening the thinking prior to obviously going out and building something and spending a lot of money. And through that process, at the end of the accelerator, ended up raising almost very close to the closing of the accelerator, the pre-seed round of financing, where we had a few early stage VCs and angel investors. And I would say the trajectory of being able to close that round in Q4 of 2021 was very much based off of the community of support that we received as part of that first cohort.
That's great. And Rory, you started mentioning this at the end of your last answer. Do you want to dig in a little bit on what was most helpful for you?
Yeah. No, it was a number of things through the program. I think we were honestly at first we were looking at Venture for Climate Tech. We weren't quite sure if it was going to be the right spot for us with kind of the hard tech motor side of things. And then we actually had a conversation with one of the entrepreneur in residence mentors that happened to have decades worth of motor sales experience, as luck would have it. And we came very quickly to realize that this was a really good program to be part of. There were resources available through the program that we just didn't find in other similar accelerators. And so we were very lucky, not only to have had a couple more touch points with the group that is now leading our pre-seed round during the program, but also to get a lot of support and guidance in looking at customers and what we actually need to be building. Of course, in the world of motors, you can build any number of different size motors for different things, and getting the team's input on how to think about where we need to be going has been just truly invaluable for our speed as a company.
That's great. And did that input come from some of the folks that you spoke about earlier in terms of kind of motor experts, or were there other folks in the program?
Yeah, no, we've had and very, very fortunate this individual came all the way down from New York to our offices in DC just to get to hang out for a day with the team, do a whole strategy like planning session on here's the technology we've got, here's in his past experience doing this, here's where he's seen motor companies really succeed. Here's where he's seen people have trouble, and just being able to guide our thinking on where are we as a company, what are really the best customers for us to be going after right now, and what are ultimately the opportunities that are going to make us a success at the end of the day. And certainly without going through the Venture for Climate Tech program, we would not have come across this person who is stepped up big time, both as a advisor to the program, but also now as a more formal advisor to the company.
That's great. And how about you, Brian? What's most top of mind and what was most helpful?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just briefly pile on to what Jeff and Rory said. I think for me, I had come across and was aware of a number of different accelerators. I think I should probably point out that the Banyon solution I often describe as kind of a Nest thermostat for EVs. So you've got a device that's got a circuit board and is running like a Linux kernel that's in the building, in the home. You also have a cloud, and then you have a mobile app. And so I knew that I had some fairly unique needs, a little bit more complicated, and I needed some help. And the other thing and so the V4C team was amazing in kind of putting their hands in the clay with me on a weekly basis to help me really work the story and tease it out, especially so that I could stand on a stage and get it done in 3 minutes. Not trivial. But I think the other key thing that I'll close on was that what jumped out to me was the NYSERDA backing and being in the state of New York. I mean, the amount of just momentum and energy, both with NYSERDA, including but not limited to the executive and residence mentor roster is pretty stellar, but also just the amount of energy in the state from Manhattan all the way to upstate has just been amazing. And that's something that truly I didn't fully appreciate, but looking back, I'm continuing getting outreach and really managing and really haven't even begun to fully tap that network.
That's great. And so now we'll briefly, do a tonal shift, I guess, a little bit, in that before we kind of switch back to like positive stuff and exciting things, want to spend a little bit of time talking about the like hard stuff, because as we all know, starting a company is hard. Building a company that interacts with the real world is really hard. And so, thinking about where you all were at when you were kind of entering into the Venture for Climate Tech program, like what were 2 to 3 big roadblocks that you were facing, and what were, some of the things that you did to overcome them at that time, or if there's ones that have happened later. I'm happy to speak to that too. Rory, do you want to start?
Yeah, happy to. I was going to say that starting a company is hard. A hard tech company is its own little can of worms, as I'm learning so personally right now. But when we were going into the Venture for Climate Tech program, at least when we first got in initially, we didn't even have a real physical prototype yet. What we really had was an idea of a market that we wanted to go into. We knew we had a technology that had validation from a third party. We had to do a motor study on it. But going into the program, we're fairly wide-eyed, and we didn't quite know where we were going to find opportunity, how we were going to find it. And certainly, and you kind of think about the challenges associated therewith, right? Finding a way to build the product while we were still going through the accelerator program, finding a way to get information out of that early enough product that's going to be able to be influential in later stage products, being able to have the conversations with customers about what are the future size products we need to make. Are we really making the best thing for this? Do we need to move somewhere else? And if we are going to move somewhere else, why are we going to do that? And it was a lot of unknowns, I think, that we had in the market, that the team really helped us to think through, and was able to get us connections and introductions and stuff that led to now with a US electric vehicle company, led to an LOI with them directly through the program and the relationships that we had built up through that. And so from a acceleration perspective, going from something that was not much more than a sketch on paper to a real product and a real customer looking to use this was pretty remarkable in the span of time that we were in there.
That's great. And how about you, Brian?
Yeah, I would say for me initially, I think the hardest part was market timing, right? So I think, we're obviously in the middle of this transition going from internal combustion based vehicles or mobility to electric. And so depending on who you talk to, oh, it's not going to be there, right? Now, if I go to the Bay Area, clearly they've got a different perspective in California, right? We're 25% of all new cars are EV. And so just getting a sense of that, I had read a lot of the wonky white papers, talked to folks at like the DOE labs and such. One of the great things, the V4C people understood that. They had folks on the team and beyond that also understood that. But I think the key thing was they helped me with that in terms of lining that up. I think the other thing that Rory had mentioned, I had developed a proof of concept in my house to address my pain points. One of the things the team did, the V4C team, is when we had the big pitch day last fall, one of the folks in the team said, look, I'm going to say something that might push you out your comfort zone. I think you should bring a prototype with you and have it on stage. And that's just something I hadn't thought about. And I said, you know what? I'm going to do it. And so I went and found someone to work with me to CAD out the design of an enclosure, and actually had to 3D print it. And so that's another kind of unspoken way in which they've really been supportive. And that really helped me because, back to I think to Rory's comments as well about challenges, I think you can explain it to folks. This is a Nest thermostat for EVs, but suddenly when I had that device in hand, I could start to see some of the light bulbs in the audience, whether it's with customers or with investors.
I just want to dig into the market timing piece, because I think that that's something that a lot of entrepreneurs that are thinking about this program probably experience at some point in time, right? How did you mentioned that was a challenge that you were facing, which could be existential, right? Like, is this, like, as you're talking to folks, like, is this actually like a real pain point, a real problem in the market? How did you get over that? Was that a storytelling problem? Was that finding customers and appetite? Was that like an early customer? Like, what was that, and what led to a solution there?
I'm sorry, Laura, that was for me.
Yeah, that was for you.
Yeah, no, look, it's been a journey. I think, as I said, if I talk to DOE folks, they get it, right? And I've gotten to know them and learn a lot from them. Similarly with utilities, although as I indicated, that can vary. I think the other challenge with the timing piece is if we look even right now, when we look at e-mobility, different automakers are maybe having some challenges kind of making that transition. Okay. So I think, and to your question, and the other key thing for me as well is ultimately my end customer is the EV owner, right? Because they've got an app that just like you set a set point for your thermostat because you want your temperature at 71 degrees in the evening, they need to be able to set their preferences for EV charging. And so, 3 years ago, a lot of folks might have said, look, this is not super relevant. I think last year, 2023, is when we kind of turn. It wasn't just a Tesla story. We saw the global 30 OEMs and the world kind of making concrete decisions to pivot to EV by the early 2030s.
Okay, great. So a little bit of finding the right stakeholders, a little bit of storytelling, a little bit of like luck, which I think is part of everyone's journey in terms of some of that timing.
Right.
Cool. Jeff, can you speak to your challenges?
I mean, starting a company is incredibly hard. Starting a company in climate tech in any capacity, you're coming up against some of the biggest problems that face humanity today. And frankly, having an accelerator like this in the early stages gives you a sounding board of other smart people who are on that shared mission to go net zero in whatever capacity or whatever lens that they're coming from. And frankly, to have that as a complementary resource or set of resources in the early days to help refine the product thinking, the business case, and make sure you're heading in a direction that is both going to build a meaningful business and be investable, I think is incredibly invaluable and amazing to have a group like this, a team like this, as well as NYSERDA supporting something like this on the state level. For our specific experience through the accelerator, I mean, going through that customer discovery, we were developing the prototype at the tail end of the accelerator to show people how it works and really building capacity, because when you're dealing with the public and private sector, obviously you are going from one person to the next and seeing if they believe what you're looking to build is worth doing or not. And sometimes the social currency of somebody just providing an introduction to the next person you're supposed to speak with within an organization to point in their direction is a valuable piece to push the agenda forward. And for our first pilot project, which we ended up doing in New York City with the DOT and the new lab, and NYSERDA actually supported us with a grant for that, plus Con Ed as a project partner and EDC being involved. And you can see how many different stakeholders had to come together just to first understand and see the value in what you're actually looking to do. And in our case, there's the target in New York City to have 10,000 curbside chargers by 2030 and 40,000 chargers by 2030. And so if they want to build out a public charging network similar to obviously what Rory ran at City Bike, then you have to engage partners across different disciplines and figure out how to create that integrated vision across stakeholders. So we see what we're doing at VoltPost as one component of that larger charging ecosystem. And frankly, if we didn't have the support of an early stage accelerator like Venture For ClimateTech, then we wouldn't have been able to meet you, Laura, or other stakeholders potentially along the way that enabled us to connect dots and build that capacity to get the first project off the ground.
Yeah, and I love that you mentioned the pilots, because it's right, like all of you are working on things that have physical components and need to be embedded into the real world. And so Jeff, you mentioned the DOT pilot, and I'll ask this of everyone, were there specific steps that you feel are like relevant or kind of applicable across this group that you all took that helped you secure that pilot? And or looking back, is there anything that you would do differently as you thought about kind of your first pilot? And what either you would need or the kind of partner would require, anything that would be top of mind?
So, I mean, I think a lot of people operate in silos in whatever their job may be. And when you're bringing any form of innovation, you're asking that person to step outside of the box for a second and consider what the world could be like if they see value in what you're proposing. And that happens on an individual level, but then when you're trying to get massive organizations to collaborate on some form of innovation, like what we're doing, as well as what everybody on this call is doing in different ways, then you kind of have to help build those bridges and have conversations that may not be having on a day-to-day or month-to-month even, where we would be informing people in, say, the DOT of things that Con Ed would be aware of that they weren't aware of. And then if we then went to the leadership team at New Lab, we would connect the dots and basically get everyone to see the same shared vision of what needs to actually get done. And it's not that many steps of work beyond what you're doing today. You just actually have to talk to each other. And since you're not going to talk to each other, we're going to talk to all of you and then present that back to you. And then ultimately figure out the scope of the project. So it's about building capacity. And I would also say, look at anything with the word lab or innovation or economic development in the title. And those are good side doors to early pilot projects.
Cool, it's great. Yeah, I think that's a common misperception that there's going to be a streamlined process, right? And that the pathway may have been set up for you. And agree, you all really helped create that path through a lot of advocacy and connecting the dots. Ryan, do you want to go next in terms of what your path has been there in terms of getting first pilots? It sounds like you pitched in the fall and you got your MVP product on the stage. Have you kind of progressed to that pilot stage, and what does that look like?
Yeah, so for me, given that utilities are my customers and they can be risk averse, back to your earlier question about storytelling, it's been a long journey. And actually in 2 weeks is Distribute Tech. And then after that is another convention called Tech Advantage. Those are kind of the CES equivalents of the industrial world. So I've been spending, the team and I, the last few months doing a build up, working with relationships. The intent there is to actually meet face to face and then get lined up for pilots starting hopefully this summer, right? Because for utilities, you can imagine they think about near term, but then a lot of these utilities have to think going out to 2030 and 2035. And so for many, as I may have hinted earlier, may not necessarily have a burning need right now with respect to pain points, but yet when they start to look at the trajectory of EV adoption, they can start to see in the next 5 years, things are going to get out ahead of them. And so finally, as I mentioned earlier with timing, I'm going to be in that position. And so I think as Jeff, maybe you mentioned, I've got somebody said, one of my guys said, hey, what happens if you come out of the conventions and you have like a long list of everybody that wants a solution? I said, that'll be a high class problem. I'll panic, I'll catch my breath and just hit it hard, the next day. So we'll see.
Yeah, no, great points. And I think just such a common theme between what you and Jeff have both said is that when you're selling to a complex customer, right, be that, a city or a utility as a regulated monopoly, which are huge organizations, or even a very large corporate, like the sales cycle can be long. And I think what Jeff was saying about like finding the folks whose job it is to do that within these organizations or have set up specific programs. And then you have a separate problem, right, of trying to get then the P&L owners to buy into what the innovation team has done. But hopefully, there's some coordination between those two. But completely agree that the mentality needs to be that these could be longer cycles with these larger groups. Rory, do you want to speak to that? I'm sure you're dealing more on the corporate side, right? When you think about the motors and what that looks like. Yeah.
Well, I was going to say it's just as complex. You think about risk adversity, and let's just say these big transportation players have that at the absolute top of mind in every conversation we have, right? One of the big challenges in the motor world that you face is you'll sit on a call with someone whose job for the last 50 years, right, has been I'm building electric motors. This motor that's powering whatever this vehicle might be, whether it's a drill all the way up to a semi truck. They've dedicated their life to building that. Now, right, my job is to come in and find a way to convince them of what you have built is great. But if you look down the line, right, we need to find other ways to do this too. And sometimes you find people that are receptive to that. Sometimes I'll just say they are not as receptive to that. We'll put it lightly there. But echoing what both Jeff and Brian have said, and I think it's really important, is that a lot of these big companies have innovation teams that are specifically looking for brand new technology. And in many ways, it's way easier to go through these teams than it is to go through a traditional engineering path. You kind of find yourself, like, for example, if we run up against someone who's done motor engineering for years and years and years, at least we have the backup of, okay, well, this is some internal and like innovation team that found us. It's not us cold outreaching and say, hey, by the way, write better mousetrap, whatever it is. Finding a way to get in with those teams has been a huge help. And this has actually been what led directly to our largest proof of concept to date with a big multinational industrial vehicle manufacturer. But again, just finding ways into these organizations and more importantly, finding the right people to talk to is very difficult. And starting with their innovation folks is a great place to start.
And just to double down on that, like it can be challenging. It sounds like you have found your ways in. Any like top couple tips that you would give folks who are maybe a couple steps behind on the journey?
Yeah. And this is to Brian's point with the trade shows and stuff like that. There's no replacement for a face-to-face meeting. So none. Being able to see someone in person, whether you have your product with you or not, helps to build a level of rapport that you just would have to spend so much more time cultivating in the kind of Zoom world. It's where we have found our biggest customers have come through either warm introductions or meeting people face to face, and being able to talk to them and get their inputs on the spot of here are our problems, here's where we're going, and being able to meet those needs in person is been super helpful to us. Relationships are I believe in any business, but especially in the motor world, as I've learned, the relationships are a big factor of your success with any of your customers.
That's great. And you know, I want to leave at least 15 minutes at the end for any questions that might come in from the audience. I think we'll just do two kind of quicker kind of questions next, as almost like a popcorn round. Because I think we've talked a little bit about pilots and implied the types of customers that you all are kind of thinking about. I think your grounding in climate for each of you feels pretty obvious in terms of the work that you're trying to do. And so just want to go kind of quickly into a couple questions. You know, we talked a little bit about biggest challenges. What about, you know, biggest surprise that you've experienced so far in building the company, like V4C or after? And any advice that you would offer related to that. Brian, do you want to kick us off?
This is probably going to sound pedestrian compared to what the other tools say. For me, the biggest surprise is reading body language during Zoom meetings. You know, when you're doing a face-to-face, we all been there. We can tell when the person maybe suffering from a food coma, or they're starting to wander, or they're not getting it. And maybe you need to spend more time on XYZ topic or slide. And I think all of us, there's a certain technical aspect, like it or not, with most climate tech technologies, including ours. And so sometimes just trying to read the tea leaves of the body language in the call, especially when you've got multiple folks, and figuring out what you need to do, and maybe call an audible, maybe jump to the appendix, or maybe just wrap things up because maybe it's just not the right person. That is probably more art than anything technical I ever expected.
Yeah, I love that advice because it's so easy to get on your talk track, right? Because you're just like, oh, this is my 30th meeting on the same topic, and I'm just gonna like go. And to your point, to make sure that that's landing, right? Like making sure that you're kind of being in that moment and responsive. It's great advice. Jeff?
I mean, I would say I was surprised with just the level of people that are trying to support you when you are trying to do something truly from a purpose-driven anchor. And frankly, that first was realized in the Venture for ClimateTech Accelerator, and the community ran that, but then realized, frankly, in this whole climate movement, and not to sound melodramatic, but there is truly a shared mission, a limited window to turn things around. Everybody on this call recognizes that and wants to help each other through connecting the dots. And if you're building something that is generally on the right track, that it does move beyond just pure capitalist intention, that the impact will drive somebody to pick up their phone or make an introduction or see if there's some aspect of being able to go out of their way. Not everybody, obviously, but I would say that there is far more people leaning into that than I would ever expect from going out and starting a company from scratch. But yeah, I mean, it's really just an honor to be part of this community and grateful to be building something that matters. And ultimately, the capitalist piece is still incredibly important. I mean, we're still running a business, but there truly is a balancing act, and that you get rewarded in this broader community because of that.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. Rory.
Well, I was going to say basically what Jeff just said. Oh, seriously,
Rory, cutting up.
Rory, you're breaking up a little bit.
Ooh, how about now? We'll take the video off and see if that frees up some bandwidth. Did that work?
Yeah,
Yes,
that
that's
sounds
better.
better.
Okay. I've been having Wi-Fi issues all day. I appreciate you flagging me on that. Well, we'll keep it off for now and hope that it comes back here in a second. But I was gonna say, in terms of the level that people are willing to go to help you out, if you just ask everyone, I think this is Jeff, to your point here, everyone loves the mission of climate tech, and there are so few people that are really willing to stand up to some of the biggest problems that face us today at a global level and say, I'm going to take a chunk out of this problem. I'm going to make a difference. And that is something that has resonated so profoundly with so many people in at least my experience. And it has encouraged people to make the connection that maybe you wouldn't have gotten. It's encouraged people to go out of their way and sit down, and even if they're not getting anything from the conversation other than talking to you, you'll leave and all of a sudden there'll be someone who says, yeah, I can make an introduction to maybe this venture firm. I can get you into this customer. I can get you into whatever this thing is that you need help with. It really is an incredibly supportive community, and that has been a tremendous surprise going into this.
Yeah, just echo that. I've heard that same sentiment and experienced it myself, but have heard that same sentiment from venture investors who used to invest in like B2B SaaS infrastructure and come into climate. They're like, wow, people are a lot nicer here and seem to really care about, the impact and the mission side, equally, if not more, right, than parts of the financial side. I'm sure y'all have experienced that on your end too. And so, okay, so maybe one more question, and we're going to do a little bit of a break in the conversation. But you all are heads down building incredible companies, but just opening it up for like inspiration. Like, who else do you think is doing something really interesting in transportation mobility or broader climate within this space that you just want to give a quick shout out to? And Rory, I'll start with you.
Hopefully the connection holds for this. And they just won a big grant out of Colorado. There's a founder's name is Seth Terry, who I've had the privilege of going through one other accelerator before this in, who's not necessarily in the traditional electrification. He's on the hydrogen side, but is building some remarkable stuff, trying to really bring hydrogen power, especially for transportation, to the masses. And he's got a pretty cool method of on-site hydrogen production. And so he describes it more technically sound than I do. I like to say he's just drilling an oil derrick at every gas station, but it's hydrogen and not oil. But he is onto something pretty remarkable, it seems like, and is someone that I definitely look up to in the space.
That's very cool, because the hydrogen infrastructure problem is just as, if not more challenging than the electrification or vehicle infrastructure problem. So exciting that he's doing it with gas stations too. Brian, do you want to go next?
Yeah, look, I'll just quickly say I'm bullish on battery technology advancements. I think one key thing, I think currently about 40% of the cost of a new EV is batteries. So we saw some huge declines last year. I think they're projecting more declines. The reason that matters, if you look at light duty, most of my friends that have watched me over the years, they want to buy EV. The thing is, they complain about the cost and they complain about range. And as those prices start to come down on the batteries, right, that whole bill of materials for the vehicle comes down, we start to push 35,000 and below 30. we start to unlock a lot more potential market, right? And in the US, we buy about 15 to 16 million cars a year. So if we can bring those prices down, we see broader adoption. It's also going to spill over into commercial and heavy duty as well, which is going to benefit, everybody on this call. So I'm fingers are crossed that we can hit the bogeys this year and continue to make some momentum.
That's great. And Jeff, ending with you.
I would say like there's so many incredible people working in climate, and we've gone through 7 accelerators now in climate and met at least 50 plus founders and founding teams, and just really amazing the work that's being done. Since this is a Venture for Climate Tech Accelerator panel, I'll give a shout out to at least one of the companies from our inaugural cohort. I guess I can many great ones, so it's hard to pick, but I would say Climatize is really cool, which does micro investing for renewable energy projects. What Will and Alva are doing. I would actually just say it's really amazing, just people even in that first cohort from 3 years ago, how we're all still talking 3 years later and trying to connect each other if there's a question about potential investment, or what do we think about some VC, or do we know something at company XYZ, that there really is just an openness to provide introductions. Another one, obviously, with Jackie, who was the former managing director who transitioned into becoming a co-founding team member and CEO at Material, on a mission to decarbonize the chemical supply chain and fashion industry. But in short, I will keep it short and stop there. There's just too many to mention as a roundup here, but just really appreciate everyone who's dedicating their lives to this mission.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeff. And if folks have questions for the panelists, we'll keep it open. I see one that's come in that's a little bit more directed to the Venture for Climate Tech team. First, there's a shout out to you, Jeff, in terms of lamppost-based charging has worked really well in London. So congrats, it's a fab solution. And then the question to the Venture for Climate Tech team is, do you accept startups that are free to use, but where monetization is via B2B? And do you back software and service startups as well? So I think one question on the business model, one question on just like understanding outside of hardware.
So Laura, a couple of things. One is, yeah, we do absolutely accept on the business model. And could you repeat the second half, please, for me?
Yeah, the second half was just, I think, double checking that you also accept startups that do kind of software only or
we do
like services. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
great.
software only. Really, Rory is hardware. Jeff is hardware and software. Actually, almost everybody's hardware and software now. Brian is hardware and software. So I think that's kind of the norm these days. But pure software we accept as well.
Hey, Laura, for the record, I guess technically, and thanks to V4C, I've simplified. Banyon is really a B2B2C, right? So I'm selling to the utility, but the end customer after that on an everyday basis is the EV owner. So I don't know, that may also provide some color for the person that asked the question.
Yeah, and some models are rather complex, to Brian's point. They're B2B2C, or they're B2B, they're B2C. They're actually B2 government. I mean, we accept all of those. It really, and all the way from an early stage paper to all the way up to technology readiness level 7. So pretty advanced. And we have a sister program that starts at technology readiness level 7. So even if you come in more advanced, we have some folks for you to talk to.
Yeah, and I think some of those more, the B2B2C business models, like especially within climate, can make a lot of sense, right? Because the customer acquisition costs, right, and the like work that you're trying to do to like convince an end customer to upgrade their home or electrify their home. Actually, the utilities are already doing that work, so why not go through them and actually provide real solutions since they already have all of those touch points? So I think for folks that are exploring things like business model, kind of being creative and thinking through like who else is trying to accomplish the same objective, and can you actually get distribution in that way? And what does that mean and look like? Maybe we'll give just like 30 more seconds if more questions come in. Otherwise, we have full latitude to wrap early and to save everyone a couple minutes to grab water or coffee before their next meeting. And maybe just helpful to remind people applications are due March 1st. I think you
That's
said
right.
Jess, at the beginning.
Exactly,
Yeah.
Laura. Yes, March 1st. And please sign up. I think we've actually got a number of ways for you to get in. Chris, if you could just repost in, or Scott or Devin, into the chat and maybe into the Q&A, even both, in terms of how people should apply.
Okay. One more question that's come in from Zach. In terms of what kind of access did the panel find that they got through Venture for Climate Tech and the program to EVs and industry? Rory, I think you were speaking to that quite a bit, so maybe this is a good one.
Yeah.
For you to cover, and then Jeff or Brian, if you have more, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, well, I can touch at least on EVs for sure. We got directly, because we're involved with Venture for Climate Tech, we got an LOI from a U.S. electric vehicle manufacturer. This was a group that we met them at Climate Week. We were invited for an event at or that Venture for Climate Tech was hosting, which is where we first met this individual. That just kind of snowballed into this much larger conversation about what they were creating and how we can support that. And of course, one thing led to the next, and we got an LOI out of it, which is a great win for us on that one. In terms of broader automotive or broader vehicles, again, directly through Venture for Climate Tech, I've had folks introduce me to electric outboard boat engine companies. I've had conversations with aerospace companies. I've had conversations with various vehicle manufacturers that folks just happen to have an in with and say, hey, I know so and so on this team's innovation, whatever. The network that the Venture for Climate Tech team has put together is remarkable, and it's, I think, very important to remember as you go through this program. It's not just you get access right to the immediate staff. The staff are all phenomenal. I'll vouch for that personally, and in terms of the folks they can get you in front of. But the executive in residence program that has so many people just living in the New York area that are remarkable experts. And again, we found someone through that's doing motor sales for 20 years. They've been doing it for a startup, have been doing it for larger companies. I'm willing to argue that pretty much no matter where you're going into in the transportation space, there's someone that will be able to offer you direct introductions to a company that you never thought you would get in with before. Certainly it worked out that way for us.
I mean, I can say,
Okay.
oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Jeff, you first.
Sure. So, I mean, one of the great introductions was with you, Laura, obviously supporting us as an advisor to the company beyond the cohort. And another I could say is with one of our pre-seed investors, pneumatic venture partners, that we met through the program and some mentor matchmaking, and ultimately invested in a round that we closed in Q4 of 2021. And then just many conversations with different potential partners that help kind of shape the journey. So just expanding your network and offerings.
Yeah, and I was going to mention the other thing that I don't think has been mentioned on the call. There's also kind of the, well, for lack of a better term, called the passive effect. I've had a number of folks, including like a large Japanese automaker, their corporate venturing group, reach out because they saw that Banyon had been a part of V4C, right? So unbeknownst to me, and I'm always curious when I talk to them, hey, how did you find me? Oh, I saw this listing and I saw that you were alum of V4C. And so that's been great too, right? Because it's a finishing school of sorts. I joke with people, but more important, it's a great platform because people do see that clearly a V4C invested time and resources to develop you. And there's probably a story there and they want to learn more. So even though for me, automakers maybe aren't as important to me as, let's say, Rory, I do want to kind of know what's happening with automotive technology. And then they're also curious to know what I'm up to. And similarly with fleet and other type of entities that are in the ecosystem.
I'm just gonna put one last little note on there because we've met a lot of automotive ventures folks through V4C. The whole passive element to this, when you think about the venture side, right, their whole thing is how do we minimize risk to their investors? That you go through and you get the tutoring and the lessons and all the work that Venture for ClimateTech puts in. It helps them to check that box in their mind of, okay, they're pre-vetted, okay, they've been trained by the best of the best. You increase your odds that they will want to take that first meeting with you.
Great. Okay, well, I think that we're approaching time, and looks like Zach, thank you for the questions and the shout outs in full. But yeah, just, I hope that everyone has a good experience. Jack, I don't know if you want to say a couple last words before we close out, but
Just a
again, I
few more.
recommend, I'll just say I recommend this program to people all the time. Really think it's an incredible way to get great non-dilutive kind of funding and support as you build out the early stages of your product. So go V4C, and very glad that you guys exist and are such strong players in the ecosystem.
Thank you, Laura. And Laura, thank you for taking the time and for helping again. I want to thank Jeff, Brian, and Rory also, and my team, who are awesome, as has been said a number of times on the call. And just one other point, and that is thanks to everyone who is on this call who talked about the network that we've got. And these folks on this call are all part of it, which is wonderful because our network is ever expanding and ever improving. And it is, when I first joined the organization just about almost a year ago now, I thought my network was strong until I joined this organization. So this network is incredible and ever improving. And kind of to Laura's earlier points, the passion that surrounds the issues in climate and energy and the talent is formidable and wonderful. And it makes me feel good every day about working harder, ever harder. So thank you all again, and thanks for the time. Everybody have a great evening, and we'll talk to you all soon. Bye-bye.